offensive was impossible, and who had designed instead the exact operation of deliberate attrition, the specific killing of French soldiers, as the strategic purpose of the battle, rather than the particular acquisition of territory. The operation produced approximately 700,000 casualties on both sides, roughly equal French and German dead, without achieving the specific strategic result that Falkenhayn had designed it to produce, because the exact mechanism of attrition worked on the German army with the particular equal efficiency that it worked on the French. The unrestricted submarine warfare campaign that the German Naval Command resumed in February 1917 was the specific decision that the particular military logic of desperation produces when the available options have been reduced to the exact choice between a gamble and a certainty of defeat. The British naval blockade was working. The specific German civilian food supply had declined to the particular level where genuine hunger was widespread, where the exact mortality from starvation-related illness was measurable in the specific statistics of civilian deaths, where the particular turnip winter of 1916 to 1917 had reduced the German civilian diet to the exact emergency substitute food that the blockade's particular effectiveness had made the only available option. The German Naval Command calculated that unrestricted submarine attacks on all shipping approaching Britain, including the specific neutral American vessels whose particular trade with Britain was sustaining the British war economy, could strangle British supplies sufficiently within 6 months to force the exact British negotiation that the land war had not produced. They understood that this specific campaign would likely bring the United States into the war. They calculated that the particular American military contribution could not be deployed effectively before the submarine campaign had produced the exact British capitulation. Both specific calculations proved wrong. The German Revolution of November 1918 began in the particular naval port of Kiel, where sailors ordered to undertake a final fleet engagement that the specific officers of the Naval Command understood as the honorable last action of a defeated navy, and that the exact sailors understood as the particular order to die. Pointlessly, in a war that was already lost, refused the order and mutinied. The specific mutiny spread to other ports, then to cities, then to Berlin itself, where the particular combination of military exhaustion, civilian hunger, and the exact political radicalization of 4 years of total war produced the specific revolution that ended the German Empire, in the particular manner of a political structure that had been hollowed out by war until nothing was left to sustain it. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on the 9th of November 1918 and fled to the Netherlands, where he would live until 1941, spending the specific decades of his exile cutting down trees on his Dutch estate in the particular obsessive activity that his biographers have interpreted as the exact displacement of a man who had nothing left to destroy that mattered. The specific armistice that ended the fighting on November 11 was signed not by the German military, but by civilian politicians. The exact circumstance that the military leadership that had directed the particular failure was about to exploit as the founding lie of the next catastrophe. Erich Ludendorff had been, for the final 2 years of the war, the specific person most responsible for the German military strategy, whose particular failure had made the armistice necessary, the exact co-director of the German war effort, working alongside the nominal Supreme Commander Hindenburg in the specific arrangement where Hindenburg provided the public face of military authority and Ludendorff provided the particular operational intelligence that directed it. It was Ludendorff who had insisted on the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. It was Ludendorff who had designed the spring offensives of 1918, the specific last desperate attempt to win the war, before American forces arrived in decisive strength, whose particular tactical successes had produced the exact strategic failure of exhausting the last German offensive reserves, without achieving the specific breakthrough that would have made the American arrival irrelevant, and it was Ludendorff who, in the particular weeks of September and October 1918, had told the Kaiser and the civilian government with the exact urgency of a man who had just understood that the specific military situation was irretrievable, that Germany needed to seek an armistice immediately before the military situation became even worse. He had demanded the armistice. He had insisted on its necessity. He had communicated the particular desperation of a military command that had run out of the specific options that 4 years of total war had consumed. And then, within weeks of the armistice being signed by the civilian government he had asked to sign it, Ludendorff began constructing the specific narrative that it had been the civilians' fault. The mechanical logic of the stab-in-the-back myth was the particular transformation of a specific chronological fact into the exact causal claim that the fact did not support. The chronological fact was real. German forces were on foreign soil when the armistice was signed. The exact front line in November 1918 ran through Belgium and France rather than through Germany itself. A soldier standing at the specific front on the 10th of November 1918 would not have known, from the immediate military situation around him, that the war was about to end. The particular claim that the myth extracted from this specific fact that the army was undefeated and could have continued fighting if the home front had not collapsed required the exact suppression of the specific military reality that Ludendorff himself had communicated to the civilian government in September. That the particular offensive capacity of the German army had been exhausted by the specific failure of the spring offensives. That the exact replacement capacity of the German manpower system could not sustain the particular attrition rate of continued fighting, and that the military situation was deteriorating in the specific manner of an army that had consumed its last strategic reserves. Hindenburg's testimony before the Reichstag committee investigating the war's causes in November 1919 was the specific moment when the myth received its most authoritative public statement. Hindenburg, whose particular personal authority as Germany's most respected living military figure, gave his specific words a weight that the particular facts could not easily overcome, told the committee that the German army had been stabbed in the back by internal enemies, the exact phrase that converted the specific political narrative that Ludendorff had been developing in private into the public founding statement of the political tradition that would eventually elect Hitler. The particular effect of a revered military commander publicly endorsing the specific claim that the military had not been responsible for the defeat, that the exact fault lay with the civilian and political forces that the armistice delegitimized, rather than the military command whose decisions had produced the strategic situation that made the armistice necessary, was the founding act of the Weimar Republic's specific political toxicity. The Treaty of Versailles imposed on Germany the specific war guilt clause, Article 231, which assigned to Germany and its allies the particular legal responsibility for causing the war and all the damage resulting from it that the exact reparations amounts were legally based on. The specific reparations figure, eventually set at 132 billion gold marks, was the particular number that Keynes and subsequent economists argued was beyond Germany's exact capacity to pay, though the particular debate about German capacity to pay versus German willingness to pay is more complicated than the simple narrative of impossible reparations suggests. The specific territorial losses, Alsace-Lorraine to France, the Polish corridor that cut East Prussia from the rest of Germany, the Saar under League of Nations administration, the exact colonies distributed among the victorious powers, were the particular material expression of a peace whose specific terms the German population experienced as the exact punishment of a war guilt they did not accept. The Weimar Republic that signed the Treaty of Versailles was not the government that had started the war. Its specific politicians were the exact democratic reformers who had replaced the imperial government in the armistice. Period. The particular injustice of this specific situation, democratic politicians being asked to accept responsibility for decisions made by the imperial system they had replaced, was the founding political vulnerability of German democracy. The specific lie that Hindenburg told in 1919 would be repeated 10,000 times in the particular years between the armistice and 1933, in the exact speeches and the specific pamphlets and the particular beer hall orations of the political movement that was building its entire identity around the founding resentment the myth had created. The man who would eventually be elected Chancellor of Germany in January 1933 had been telling this specific story since 1919, telling it with the exact conviction of someone who had decided that the particular truth of what had happened was less useful than the specific lie that explained it. and the particular Germany that had been through 4 years of war, followed by the exact economic chaos of hyperinflation and then depression, was ready to believe him. The German Empire lasted 47 years. In that specific time, it produced more Nobel Prize winners per capita than any other country, wrote the legal framework for the modern welfare state, developed the university research model that the entire world subsequently adopted as the standard for advanced education, and created the particular industrial and scientific capacity that made Germany the second largest economy in the world within a generation of its founding. It also produced the specific chain of events, the particular foreign policy decisions, the exact military strategy, the specific stab-in-the-back mythology whose cumulative consequence was the Second World War, the Holocaust, and the death of approximately 70 to 85 million people. These two things are not separable. They are the specific expressions of the same civilization in the particular different conditions of peace and war, the exact same national character, the organizational genius, the particular intensity of commitment, the specific thoroughness that made German science and German military planning and German bureaucratic administration all function at the same extraordinary level of concentrated efficiency applied to different purposes, under different institutional constraints. Albert Einstein developed special relativity in 1905 while working at the Swiss Patent Office, the specific paper that converted the exact understanding of space and time that Newtonian physics had operated with for 2 and A half centuries into the particular framework that quantum mechanics and the modern understanding of the universe would be built on. Max Planck's quantum hypothesis, developed in 1900, was the founding act of quantum mechanics, the specific scientific revolution that produced the exact understanding of matter at the atomic and subatomic level, that made modern chemistry, materials, science, and ultimately nuclear technology possible. Fritz Haber's synthesis of ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen, developed at the specific Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and refined for industrial production before 1914, was the particular chemical achievement that made synthetic fertilizer possible, the exact agricultural technology that allowed the specific global population growth of the 20th century by producing the particular food supply. That natural nitrogen fixation could not have sustained. The specific paradox of Haber is the particular expression of the German imperial legacy at its most complete. The man whose exact chemistry feeds approximately half the world's current population through the particular agricultural productivity that synthetic fertilizer makes possible, also developed the specific chemical weapons that were first deployed at Ypres in 1915, whose exact horror was the founding act of the chemical warfare tradition that the 20th century subsequently prohibited. The specific institutional legacy of the German imperial period in European governance is most visible in the exact architecture of the European Union, whose founding logic, the particular project of binding the specific European national economies together in institutional relationships whose exact mutual dependence would make the particular national conflicts of the 19th and 20th centuries structurally impossible to repeat, was the direct response to the specific catastrophes that the German Empire's failure produced. The European coal and steel community that Robert Schuman proposed in 1950 was explicitly designed to place the exact Franco-German industrial production of steel and coal, the specific raw materials of the particular process. Wars that the two countries had fought 3 times in 70 years, under a common institutional authority whose particular management would make the specific decision to go to war between them economically impossible. The exact institutional logic of European integration is the particular answer to the specific question that the German Empire's particular founding and failure raised. How do you create a European order in which the specific power of a unified German economy and population can be accommodated without producing the exact diplomatic instability whose particular expression was the particular war of crimes? The German Federal Republic that emerged from the specific catastrophe of the Second World War and the particular division of Germany into Western and Eastern states for 45 years is the exact institutional expression of the past. Specific lessons that German political culture drew from the PERT. Particular failure of the Weimar Republic, the proportional representation system, modified to prevent the specific fragmentation that had made parliamentary governance impossible, the particular constructive vote of no confidence that prevented the exact removal of a government without the specific installation of a successor, the particular constitutional court whose exact judicial review function was designed to prevent the specific emergency powers mechanism whose abuse had made Hitler's dictatorship possible. The Grundgesetz, the basic law, was the particular constitutional document whose exact drafting in 1949 incorporated the specific institutional lessons of Weimar's failure with the particular care of a civilization that had paid the exact price that institutional design failure produces at its worst. The Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the particular working through of the past, is the specific ongoing project of German public life since 1945, whose exact seriousness has no parallel in the civic culture of any comparable civilization. The particular Holocaust memorials, the specific mandatory school education about the Nazi period, the exact legal prohibitions on Holocaust denial, the particular public culture of reckoning with the specific crimes committed in the German name, these are the exact expressions of a civilization that has decided, collectively and institutionally, that the specific engagement with its own worst historical chapter is the particular ongoing obligation of everyone who lives within the civilization's continuing existence. The specific German word, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which does not translate easily into English, because English does not have the exact equivalent concept, as a single word, is itself the particular evidence of a civilization that has built the specific engagement with historical responsibility into the particular vocabulary it uses to describe its own public life. What do you think? A nation that spent 2.5 centuries fragmented, unified in a decade through one statesman's specific genius, built one of the world's most powerful states in 40 years, destroyed itself, and much of Europe in the particular wars its founding decisions made possible, and then rebuilt itself into the specific model of democratic governance and historical reckoning that the European tradition now holds up, as the particular example of how a civilization can confront its worst chapter, is that a story of catastrophe, or the specific story of a civilization that found, through the exact process of losing everything it had built through power without wisdom, the particular thing worth building instead. Leave your thoughts below, because the history of the German Empire is not finished. It is being argued about right now in the specific debates about what Germany owes, what Europe requires, and the particular ongoing question of what the civilization that produced both Beethoven and Auschwitz tells us about the exact relationship between human capability and the specific institutional wisdom required to prevent capability from becoming catastrophe, and the ending remains genuinely uncertain. Versailles, on the 18th of January, 1871, was accomplished in the exact enemy capital, in the particular throne room of French greatness, before the specific German princes who had spent the previous decade watching Bismarck build what the Frankfurt liberals could only dream. The exact location was not accidental. It was the particular statement of a man who understood that the specific founding act of the new Germany required a symbol whose weight exceeded any constitutional document. France would not forget. Europe would not forget. And in forgetting to consider exactly what they were beginning, neither would Germany. The specific ceremony in which Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor took place on the 18th of January, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the particular location chosen not for its logistical convenience, but for its specific symbolic meaning. The founding act of German imperial power, announced in the most famous throne room of French civilization, in the specific palace that Louis XIV had built, as the particular expression of French civilizational supremacy. The particular German generals and princes assembled in the Hall of Mirrors were making a statement whose specific content was unmistakable. The Europe that had existed before this moment was over, and the particular Europe that began in this room would be organized around the specific power of the new German Empire. This chapter explores the founding of the German Empire as the specific political achievement and the particular psychological wound simultaneously the achievement that Bismarck had orchestrated through 3 wars and 20 years of political maneuvering, and the wound that the specific location of the ceremony, the particular manner of the defeat inflicted on France, and the exact terms of the peace that followed, including the specific annexation of Alsace-Lorraine and the particular indemnity of 5 billion francs inflicted on France and on the European balance of power. It traces the specific constitutional structure of the new empire, the particular federal arrangement whose design gave Prussia the exact dominance that Bismarck's strategy had sought, while maintaining the specific, nominal, sovereignty of the other German states, the particular Reichstag whose limited authority reflected Bismarck's specific contempt for parliamentary democracy, and the founding tensions between the empire's formal constitutional structure and its particular political reality. The specific nightmare that organized Bismarck's entire foreign policy after 1871 was the particular coalition, France on the west, Russia on the east, the 2 powers attacking simultaneously across the specific flat geography of Central Europe that offered Germany no natural defensive barriers on either frontier. He had spent his career creating the German Empire through the exact strategic isolation of his opponents, and he understood, with the particular clarity of the man who had done the isolating, that every power he had defeated or humiliated now had the specific motive to reverse what he had accomplished, and that the particular combination of French revanchism over Alsace-Lorraine and Russian anxiety over German power in Central Europe was the exact coalition whose formation he needed to prevent indefinitely. The specific 20 years of European peace that followed 1871 were not the absence of conflict. They were the particular product of a diplomatic management system so complex and so precisely calibrated that it required its architect's specific personal attention to function, the exact mechanism of an exceptionally intelligent man, holding simultaneously the specific threads of relationships whose particular incompatibility he was concealing from all their participants. The 3 Emperors' League of 1873 and its successor of 1881 was Bismarck's particular attempt to solve the specific Russian problem through the exact logic of including Russia in the German diplomatic framework, rather than leaving it outside as a potential partner for France. The particular arrangement that connected the German, Austrian, and Russian emperors in a specific consultative relationship was the exact institutional expression of the conservative solidarity of the 3 Eastern monarchies against the particular threat of revolutionary nationalism. The specific ideological glue that Bismarck used to connect powers whose interests in the Balkans were becoming the particular source of the incompatibility that the League was supposed to manage. The Austro-Russian rivalry over the specific territories of the declining Ottoman Empire, the exact contest over who would inherit the particular influence in the Balkans that Ottoman weakness was creating, was the specific structural problem that no amount of imperial solidarity could permanently suppress, because the particular interests of Vienna and St. Petersburg in Bulgaria, in Serbia, in the Aegean access routes, were specifically incompatible in ways that required one side to lose whatever the other side gained. The Reinsurance Treaty of 1887 was Bismarck's particular diplomatic masterpiece, and the exact expression of what made his system simultaneously brilliant and impossible to sustain. When the 3 Emperors' League collapsed under the specific pressure of the Austro-Russian conflict over Bulgaria, Bismarck negotiated the Reinsurance Treaty with Russia bilaterally, the particular secret agreement in which Germany and Russia promised neutrality in the event that either was attacked by a third power, with the specific exception of German aggression against France or Russian aggression against Austria. The exact problem with this arrangement was its particular incompatibility with the dual alliance that Germany had already signed with Austria-Hungary, the specific promise to support Austria in certain conflict scenarios. Was, in the exact combination with the specific promise of neutrality toward Russia in others, the particular diplomatic double-dealing whose terms Bismarck was maintaining simultaneously in agreements whose parties did not know about each other. He was keeping the European peace by telling specific partial truths to multiple powers simultaneously, and the system worked precisely as long as Bismarck himself was managing its particular contradictions. The domestic tensions that Bismarck was managing simultaneously with the foreign policy were the specific expression of the exact social transformation that the German Industrial Revolution was producing. Germany's particular industrial economy was expanding at a rate that was creating the specific working-class population whose political mobilization the Social Democratic Party was organizing, with the exact efficiency that Bismarck found alarming the particular Marxist party whose specific commitment to international class solidarity represented, in Bismarck's specific political understanding, the exact domestic equivalent of the foreign coalition he was working to prevent. His response was the particular combination of the anti-socialist laws, which banned social democratic organization and press from 1878 to 1890, and the specific social insurance legislation, the founding acts of the modern welfare state, including accident insurance, health insurance, and old age pensions that Bismarck designed as the exact alternative to socialist mobilization, the specific attempt to give the German working class the material security that would reduce its particular attraction to the revolutionary political tradition, the specific personal relationship between Bismarck and the young Kaiser Wilhelm II, was the particular human drama whose exact resolution determined the fate of the entire diplomatic system. Wilhelm II had come to the throne in 1888, at 29 years old, with the particular confidence of a man who had grown up watching Bismarck govern and who had concluded, with the exact error of the inexperienced powerful, that the specific results of Bismarck's methods were simpler to produce than the particular system required. When Wilhelm II dismissed Bismarck in March 1890 and declined to renew the reinsurance treaty with Russia, the specific diplomatic architecture that had kept the European peace for 20 years began dissolving with the particular speed of a system whose components had been held in specific tension by a single will. Russia, finding Germany's particular door closed, turned toward France. The exact Franco-Russian alliance of 1894 was the specific coalition that Bismarck had spent 20 years preventing. It was accomplished within 4 years of his dismissal. The particular nightmare he had managed was now the specific reality that his successors would have to confront, and they would confront it with none of his particular genius for managing contradictions. Wilhelm II was born with a withered left arm, the specific result of a difficult birth whose particular obstetric complications left the future German emperor with a limb approximately 15 centimeters shorter than the right, which he spent the rest of his life disguising with the exact combination of tailored uniforms, strategic poses, and the particular physical positioning in photographs and public appearances that prevented the specific disability from being clearly visible. The biographers who have examined his life in the light of this specific physical reality have disagreed about exactly how much his particular compensation for the withered arm shaped the precise personality that produced the foreign policy disasters of his reign. What is not seriously disputed is the specific pattern of the personality, the particular need for admiration that his contemporaries documented with remarkable consistency, the exact impulsiveness that could not sustain the specific patience that governing a complex empire in a complex international environment required, and the particular sensitivity to personal slight that converted diplomatic exchanges into personal confrontations with the specific regularity of a man who experienced political opposition as personal rejection. He was 29 years old when he became emperor, and the particular confidence with which he dismissed Bismarck 2 years later was the specific expression of a man who had watched the old chancellor govern with the exact authority of Germany's most consequential statesman, and who had concluded, from this specific observation, that governing was simpler than Bismarck made it appear. Bismarck made it appear simple because he was exceptional at concealing its complexity, the particular professional habit of a diplomat whose specific system depended on other powers not understanding the exact mechanism of the management. Wilhelm interpreted the appearance of simplicity as the reality of simplicity, and acted accordingly the specific error of the inexperienced powerful who mistake the smoothness of an expert's performance for the absence of the Crown's skill producing it. The decision not to renew the reinsurance treaty with Russia in 1890 was the particular founding act of the Wilhelmine diplomatic disaster, the specific choice whose exact consequences Bismarck had spent 20 years preventing, and which Wilhelm's advisers accomplished within months. Of the old chancellor's departure. The particular reasoning offered at the time was the specific argument that the reinsurance treaty's terms were incompatible with the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, whose exact obligations it might compromise in certain conflict scenarios. Bismarck had been managing this specific incompatibility for 3 years without the particular difficulty that his successors found in it, because Bismarck understood that the exact management of diplomatic incompatibilities was the specific function of the foreign minister's office, rather than the particular problem that required eliminating one of the incompatible elements. Russia, finding the German door suddenly closed, turned toward France. The particular Franco-Russian alliance of 1894 was the exact coalition that Bismarck had spent 20 years preventing, accomplished within 4 years of his departure. The Morocco crises of 1905 and 1911 were the specific diplomatic disasters that most completely revealed the particular pattern of Wilhelmine foreign policy, the exact combination of aggressive, initial positioning, followed by the particular retreat that converted a potentially successful pressure campaign into a specific demonstration of German diplomatic weakness. In 1905, Wilhelm landed at Tangier and declared the specific German interest in Moroccan independence in the particular challenge to French influence in North Africa, whose exact intention was to demonstrate German power and split the Entente Cordiale. The specific outcome was the Algeciras Conference, which resolved the crisis substantially in France's favor and demonstrated to the particular European audience watching the exact conference proceedings that Germany's aggressive posture had been backed by insufficient diplomatic preparation. In 1911, the German gunboat Panther was sent to the Moroccan port of Agadir in the particular display of German interest that was supposed to extract specific compensating colonial concessions from France. Germany received a specific portion of the French Congo, whose exact value was considerably less than the particular diplomatic cost of the crisis, which had again demonstrated the specific pattern of a power that threatened more than it delivered. The naval build-up under Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz was the specific strategic mistake whose particular character Bismarck had explicitly warned against during his chancellorship. Britain's benign neutrality toward Germany, the exact diplomatic posture that Bismarck had cultivated and that had kept Britain from joining any anti-German coalition, rested on the specific foundation of a German foreign policy that did not threaten British naval supremacy. Tirpitz's particular plan for a battle fleet, whose specific size and capability would challenge British naval dominance, was the exact instrument that converted British calculation from the specific neutrality that served both countries' interests into the particular alarm that produced the Anglo-French military conversations and, eventually, Britain's presence in the August 1914 war. Wilhelm received the news of the July crisis in 1914 from his summer vacation cruise, with the particular shock of a man who had spent decades practicing the specific diplomatic bluster that did not intend war, and now discovered that the particular mechanism he had helped build was producing it anyway. The German Empire that Wilhelm II steered toward August 1914 was the specific same empire that Bismarck had built. The particular military capacity, the exact industrial strength, the specific geographic vulnerability, but governed now by the exact opposite of the Bismarckian temperament. Where Bismarck had managed complexity with patience, Wilhelm had replaced complexity with impulsiveness. Where Bismarck had maintained peace through the particular manipulation of other powers' interests, Wilhelm had generated resentment through the specific manner of asserting German interests without the diplomatic skill to convert assertion into achievement. The particular war that was coming would demonstrate, with the exact comprehensiveness of industrial-scale destruction, what the specific difference between those two approaches to power actually cost. Gavrilo Princip was 19 years old on the morning of the 28th of June, 1914, and the specific chain of events that placed him on the corner of Franz Josef Street in Sarajevo with a pistol was the particular product of the Austro-Hungarian occupation of Bosnia that Princip's particular nationalist tradition experienced as the exact oppression that Serbian independence represented the specific alternative to. The Archduke's motorcade had already passed the specific spot where another conspirator had thrown a bomb that bounced off the car and wounded people in the following vehicle. The motorcade had changed its route. Princip had given up and stopped at a delicatessen on Franz Joseph Street to buy something to eat when the Archduke's car made a specific wrong turn, stalled directly in front of him, and the particular convergence of an assassin, a changed route, a wrong turn, and a stalled engine produced in the space of a few seconds, the exact shots that killed Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, and began the particular chain of decisions whose collective outcome was the deadliest war in human history. To that point, the blank check that Kaiser Wilhelm II and Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg issued to Austria-Hungary on July 5 and 6 was the specific German diplomatic document, whose particular consequences the men who wrote it appear to have, calculated with the exact insufficient care of decision-makers, who were thinking about the specific short-term management of an ally's anxieties rather than the particular long-term implications of the commitment they were making. The specific content of the blank check was the German guarantee of unconditional support for whatever Austria-Hungary decided to do in response to the assassination, the exact diplomatic reassurance that the Austrian military faction advocating for a punitive war against Serbia needed to overcome the particular hesitations of the Austrian foreign minister and emperor. Germany issued this specific guarantee in the particular belief, or the exact hope, which is a different thing, that Russia would not intervene on Serbia's behalf, that the crisis would remain regional, and that the particular Austrian punishment of Serbia would be the specific local resolution of a Balkan incident that would leave Germany and Austria in a stronger regional position. Bethmann Hollweg's specific awareness of the risk he was taking is documented in the particular diary entry of his aide Kurt Riesler, who recorded the Chancellor's private assessment of the situation in terms that reveal the exact gap between the specific public confidence of the blank check and the particular private anxiety of a man who understood that he was gambling. Bethmann Hollweg reportedly told Riesler that if war came, it would come regardless of the specific German response to the July crisis, and that the particular option of restraining Austria would produce the exact outcome of Russian and French encirclement without the specific war that might resolve the encirclement on terms favorable to Germany. This was the particular logic of a man who had decided that the specific risk of a continental war was preferable to the exact alternative of strategic deterioration, a decision whose moral weight, given what the war actually cost, is the founding act of the particular historical debate about German responsibility for 1914. The Schlieffen Plan, named for the former German Chief of Staff, Alfred von Schlieffen, who had developed it in the years after 1897, was the specific military document that converted the particular diplomatic crisis into the exact military catastrophe by removing the particular time available for political military resolution once mobilization began. The plan's specific logic was this: Germany faced the exact two-front war that Bismarck had spent 20 years preventing, with France to the west and Russia to the east, and the particular asymmetry of mobilization speeds. Russia required approximately 6 weeks to fully mobilize. Its enormous but geographically dispersed military created the specific window in which Germany could defeat France, before turning east to face the Russian force. The plan required the particular rapid advance through Belgium, the exact neutral country whose specific treaty guarantees Britain had signed in 1839 because the specific Franco-German border was too heavily fortified for the rapid advance the plan required. The invasion of Belgium was not the particular political afterthought of a war already decided on other grounds. It was the exact military requirement of the only plan that the German General Staff had for fighting the two-front war. Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary, described watching the lamps going out all over Europe on the specific evening of August 4 as Britain entered the war, the particular metaphor of a man who understood that the exact world that had existed before that evening would not exist again in his lifetime. He was correct in the specific manner that only the worst predictions proved to be. The particular war that began in August 1914 was not the specific short war that anyone had planned for. The exact Schlieffen Plan's rapid defeat of France did not occur. The particular German advance was stopped at the Marne in September, and the specific military reality of the Western Front settled into the trench system that would consume approximately 2 million German dead over the following 4 years. The particular empire that Bismarck had built through 3 precise wars lasting weeks and months was about to discover what happened when the specific military instrument he had perfected was applied to a conflict whose particular character and duration exceeded every specific assumption that German military and political planning had made about what war in the industrial age would look like. The German soldiers who crossed into Belgium in August 1914 were told they would be home before the leaves fell. This specific promise, offered by officers who believed it, drawn from the particular calculation of military planners who had studied the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and concluded that the modern industrial army's decisive superiority of firepower and organization would produce the exact swift campaign that the Schlieffen Plan promised, was the particular founding lie of the First World War, the specific prediction whose failure cost approximately 17 million lives. The leaves fell, the men did not come home, and the specific military reality that emerged from the first 3 months of fighting, the particular failure of the German advance at the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914, where the French and British armies stopped the German sweep through France and forced the specific tactical withdrawal that began the particular process of entrenching, produced the exact war that nobody had planned for, and that the specific military institutions of every power had organized themselves to fight for approximately 6 months. The trench system that stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border by December 1914 was the particular military architecture of industrial stalemate, the exact expression of what happens when the defensive power of modern weapons, machine guns and artillery capable of making open ground impassable exceeds the offensive power available to break through a prepared defensive line. The specific German position on the Western Front was, from the military strategic perspective, simultaneously strong and catastrophic. Strong because the particular German trenches sat on French and Belgian soil, meaning that any negotiated peace from positions of current military occupation would leave Germany in a favorable territorial situation, and catastrophic because the exact naval blockade that Britain had imposed was strangling the specific German civilian economy with the particular thoroughness of a siege conducted at the scale of an entire country. The Battle of Verdun, which began in February 1916 and lasted until December of that year, was designed by the German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, as the specific operation that would resolve the Western Front stalemate not by breaking through the French lines, but by the particular mechanism of forcing France to defend Aprils. Position whose symbolic significance Verdun was the specific fortress city that embodied French national resistance would compel the French to feed soldiers into the battle until French military manpower was bled below the exact threshold of further offensive capability. The specific calculus was the particular one of a man who had concluded that the conventional, Voltaire's famous observation that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, was the particular wit of a Frenchman who understood that the specific institution governing the German-speaking lands of Central Europe had, by the 18th century, become the most complete institutional expression of political dysfunction in the Western world, a nominal empire whose particular emperor was elected by a college of princes whose specific interest in choosing a weak candidate exceeded their collective interest in choosing a capable one, whose specific legislative body the Reichstag met in permanent session at Regensburg without ever passing legislation of any practical consequence, and whose exact territorial scope encompassed approximately 300 separate political entities ranging from the specific Kingdom of Prussia to the particular free city of a few thousand inhabitants whose nominal sovereignty gave it the state. Same formal status in the imperial constitution as the largest German state. The Holy Roman Empire was not governing Germany. It was the specific institutional framework within which Germany governed itself into permanent fragmentation. The 30 Years' War that devastated the German-speaking lands from 1618 to 1648 was the particular catastrophe that converted the specific political fragmentation of the Holy Roman Empire from a diplomatic inconvenience into a civilizational trauma. fought initially as a religious conflict between Catholic and Protestant princes, transformed progressively into the particular general European war in which France, Sweden, Denmark, and the Habsburg Empire used the German territories as the specific battlefield of their competing ambitions. The 30 Years' War killed approximately a third of the German-speaking population through combat, through the epidemic diseases that the armies carried, through the specific famines produced by the systematic destruction of the agricultural infrastructure that sustained the civilian population. Some regions lost half their population. The particular city of Magdeburg, stormed and burned by Catholic forces in 1631, lost approximately 25,000 of its 30,000 inhabitants in the specific event whose particular horror was so complete that Magdeburg's name became the founding vocabulary of atrocity for the subsequent century, of European consciousness. The Peace of Westphalia that ended the war in 1648 was simultaneously the specific diplomatic achievement that stopped the killing and the particular legal settlement that guaranteed the political fragmentation of Germany would continue. The specific sovereignty of each of the approximately 300 German princes over their own territories was confirmed and strengthened the particular right to determine the religion of their subjects, to conduct their own foreign policy, to maintain their own military forces in the exact arrangement that prevented any single German state from accumulating the specific power that unification would require. France had fought in the war partly to produce this specific outcome, the particular guarantee of German fragmentation that the specific French strategic tradition identified as the foundational requirement of French security. A Germany that could not unite was a Germany that could not threaten France. Prussia's specific rise within this fragmented landscape was the particular paradox of a state whose geographic disadvantages were so severe that they produced, through the specific mechanism of existential necessity, the exact institutional qualities that would eventually overcome them. The Hohenzollern territories in the mid-17th century were a scattered collection of disconnected lands, Brandenburg in the center, the specific Duchy of Prussia to the east, separated from the main territory by Polish lands, other holdings to the west without the natural resources, the defensive geography, or the population density that the conventional wisdom of state power required. What the great elector, Friedrich Wilhelm, and his successors built on this specific, unpromising foundation was the particular administrative and military system whose exact qualities, the specific professional bureaucracy, the particular officer corps whose training exceeded anything comparable in Europe, the exact fiscal organization that converted modest revenues into maximum military output, made Prussia capable of performing beyond its weight in the specific manner of institutions that have been forced by particular scarcity to develop efficiencies that comfort never produces. The specific cultural achievement of the German-speaking world in the 18th century, the particular philosophy of Kant, the exact literary genius of Goethe and Schiller, the specific musical tradition that runs from Bach through Haydn and Mozart, and will eventually reach Beethoven and Brahms, was the particular expression of a civilization that had directed its specific collective genius inward, toward the exact questions of human understanding and aesthetic experience, in the particular absence of the political unity and external ambition that would have directed that genius elsewhere. The specific civilization that had produced Kant's critique of pure reason and Goethe's Faust and Beethoven's symphonies was politically incapable of governing itself as a single entity. The particular question that the 19th century would answer whether the specific political unity that the German-speaking world had failed to achieve for 2.5 centuries could be manufactured from the particular materials available would be answered not by the liberals who dreamed of it, but by the specific Prussian statesmen who understood that dreams required iron to become reality. Frederick William I of Prussia, who reigned from 1713 to 1740, was the specific ruler who made the particular institutional decision that converted Prussia from a middling German state into the military power whose particular efficiency would eventually remake the map of Europe. He inherited a kingdom with approximately 2 million subjects and a treasury that his predecessor had spent on Baroque court culture, the specific palaces, the particular opera houses, the exact ceremonial apparatus that the 18th century understood as the necessary performance of royal authority, and he converted it, with the particular ruthlessness of a man who found aesthetic expenditure personally offensive, into a military fund. He sold the royal jewels. He reduced the court staff. He wore a specific plain blue coat for the rest of his reign and required his officials to do the same, the particular uniform of a monarchy that had decided that the exact resources consumed by ceremonial display were resources stolen from the military establishment that the kingdom's survival required. By the time he died, approximately 80% of the Prussian state budget was being spent on the army, and the specific army his savings had built was, per capita, the most powerful in Europe. The particular institutional innovation of Frederick William I was the Junker officer corps, the specific arrangement by which the Prussian landowning nobility, the Junkers, were systematically recruited into the military, as officers whose particular service was simultaneously their social obligation and their economic livelihood. This specific relationship between the Prussian state and its nobility was different in character from the arrangements in France or Austria, where the particular nobility's relationship to military service was more optional and more ceremonial. In Prussia, the exact expectation was comprehensive. Noble sons entered the military as cadets, rose through the specific ranks of the officer corps, and governed their estates in the particular off-duty periods between campaigns. The result was an officer class, whose specific professional identity was military, rather than courtly men who understood war as a craft to be practiced, rather than a ceremony to be performed, whose particular commitment to the specific details of training, logistics, and tactical innovation made the Prussian army function at a level whose quality exceeded what the particular size of Prussia could have produced from any other institutional arrangement. Frederick II, Frederick the Great, inherited this specific military machine in 1740 and immediately invaded Silesia, the particular prosperous Austrian province whose specific industrial and agricultural resources would make Prussia genuinely viable as a great power rather than merely militarily impressive beyond its size. The invasion was an act of specific international law-breaking, whose exact justification Frederick's own private writings acknowledge as essentially non-existent. He wanted Silesia, because Silesia was worth having, and because the particular moment of Austrian dynastic vulnerability, with Maria Theresa newly on the throne and surrounded by enemies on every side, made the specific calculation of risk acceptable. He was 28 years old. The invasion triggered the War of the Austrian Succession and eventually the 7 Years' War, the particular global conflict that Frederick described as the most difficult experience of his life, and that produced, in its specific military operations, the founding case studies of European military thought for the following century. The 7 Years' War, in which Prussia faced the combined armies of Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, and Saxony simultaneously, the particular coalition whose combined resources outnumbered Prussia approximately 3-1, was the specific military crisis that most completely revealed the particular qualities of the Prussian system. Frederick survived it through the exact combination of interior lines, which allowed him to shift forces between fronts faster than his enemies could coordinate their attacks, and the specific tactical flexibility of an army trained to maneuver and attack with a speed and precision that larger but less disciplined forces could not match. The particular Battle of Rossbach in November 1757, where Frederick's force of approximately 22,000 routed a combined Franco-Austrian army of approximately 42,000 inches, approximately 90 minutes, inflicting 10,000 casualties while suffering fewer than 550, was the specific military engagement that established the Prussian army's particular reputation as something qualitatively different from any other European force. The specific administrative tradition that the Prussian state developed alongside its military was the particular institutional complement whose exact efficiency made the military system sustainable. The Prussian bureaucracy, whose specific professionalism, whose particular freedom from corruption relative to other 18th-century European states, and whose exact organizational capacity for extracting the maximum tax revenue from a modest economic base, was the founding institutional inheritance of the German Empire that would be built on the Prussian model in Eisenbarbeitsgeschichte. The specific Prussian administrative examination system, which required officials to pass qualifying tests rather than merely purchase their positions, produced the particular quality of civil service whose exact competence made the Prussian state function at a level that its resources alone could not have produced. The specific Prussia that Frederick the Great left when he died in 1786 was larger, wealthier, and more institutionally sophisticated than the one he had inherited, but also, in the particular manner of states whose specific success has been built on military power and one exceptional ruler's personal genius, more vulnerable than its reputation suggested. The particular defeat at Jena Auerstedt in 1806, where Napoleon destroyed the Prussian army in a single day, would reveal the exact institutional sclerosis that had developed in the decades since Frederick's death. But the specific recovery from that defeat, the particular reforms of Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the exact institutional renovation that converted the defeated army into the force that would fight at Waterloo and eventually produce Bismarck's wars, would demonstrate that the Prussian institutional tradition was more durable than any single military catastrophe. The men who gathered in Frankfurt's St. Paul's Church in May 1848 were the particular expression of the specific civilization that the German Enlightenment had produced. Professors, lawyers, journalists, physicians, the educated middle class whose particular combination of cultural nationalism and liberal political principles represented the exact vision of Germany that the Romantic tradition had been developing for half a century. They were, by every measure of intellectual sophistication, the most educated revolutionary assembly in European history. Approximately 60% of the delegates held university degrees at a time when a university degree represented the specific pinnacle of educational attainment available to any European. They spoke, on the particular questions before them, with the exact precision of men who had spent their careers thinking carefully about the foundations of political order. And they were, in the specific manner that intellectual sophistication can sometimes substitute for political power rather than producing it, almost entirely incapable of translating their particular ideas into the exact institutional reality that the moment required. The specific political crisis that had produced the Frankfurt Parliament was the particular wave of revolutionary pressure that swept across Europe in the spring of 1848, the Parisian Revolution of February, the Viennese uprising in March, the specific barricades in Berlin that forced the Prussian King Frederick William IV to bow his head before the dead revolutionaries, in a particular act of royal humiliation that he would spend the rest of his reign trying to forget, and revenge. The German princes had, in the specific shock of the revolutionary moment, conceded the particular right of a freely elected assembly to draft the constitution of a unified German state, and the Frankfurt delegates had interpreted this specific concession as the founding act of the democratic Germany, whose particular vision had sustained the liberal tradition through the decades of Metternich's conservative restoration. What they had actually received was the exact permission of frightened princes who expected to retract it as soon as their specific fear subsided. The particular debate that consumed the Frankfurt Parliament's first months was the specific question that the German liberal tradition had been unable to resolve through philosophy, and that proved equally intractable in the Stulias. Particular conditions of an actual constitutional assembly. What was Germany? The specific German-speaking world included the territories of the Austrian Habsburg Empire, whose particular multi-ethnic character the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Poles, the Italians, the Slovenes, all governed under the same Habsburg crown. As the German Austrians made its inclusion in a German national state, the exact constitutional impossibility of incorporating the non-German peoples who had no interest in being part of the specific German project. The particular Kleindeutsch solution, the small Germany that excluded Austria and was dominated by Prussia, was the specific answer that the political reality eventually imposed, but its acceptance by the Frankfurt delegates required the particular abandonment of the Grossdeutsch vision, whose specific cultural appeal to delegates who identified with the entirety of German-speaking civilization produced the deadlock that consumed months of parliamentary time. Frederick William IV of Prussia received the specific offer of the German imperial crown from the Frankfurt delegation in April 1849, and his rejection of it was the particular act whose exact language revealed the specific political philosophy of a man who understood throne and crown as divine gifts rather than democratic grants. He would not, he told the delegation, accept a crown from the gutter, the particular phrase whose exact contempt was the specific statement of a monarch who regarded a parliament-offered crown as a fundamental contradiction of everything legitimate kingship meant. The specific crown he was being offered was, in his particular understanding, not the German crown at all, but the exact revolutionary symbol of the specific social order he had spent his reign defending against. The specific revolutionary moment collapsed in the summer and autumn of 1849, with the particular speed of a political movement that had never secured the exact military force that political transformation requires when the established powers decide to resist it. The Prussian army restored order in the specific German states where the revolutionary governments had not yet been suppressed. The Austrian military crushed the particular Hungarian revolution with Russian assistance. The Frankfurt Parliament's particular rump, the specific delegates who remained after the Prussian and Austrian representatives withdrew, moved to Stuttgart and was dispersed by Württemberg soldiers in June. The exact ending of the particular democratic German dream, in the specific manner of a government that had never controlled the army, it would have needed to survive. The specific lesson that the failure of 1848 taught to the generation of Germans who would eventually produce German unification was the particular lesson that the political tradition of blood and iron drew from the specific evidence of the parliamentary failure, that the exact German unity the Frankfurt delegates had sought through constitutional deliberation required the particular military force and the specific political ruthlessness that deliberation could not provide. The specific man who had been watching the Frankfurt Parliament with the exact contempt of a Prussian conservative who understood power rather than the particular respect of a liberal who believed in it, was 33 years old in her. Serving as the Prussian delegate to the Frankfurt Assembly and drawing the exact conclusions from its failure that would eventually make him the specific architect of the German unification that the Parliament had dreamed of and been unable to build. Otto von Bismarck had learned precisely what the liberal tradition could not do. He spent the next 23 years demonstrating what it required instead. Otto von Bismarck became Minister-President of Prussia in September 1862 inches. The specific political crisis of a constitutional conflict between the Prussian Parliament and the monarchy over military funding. The particular budget dispute in which the liberal parliamentary majority was refusing to approve the military expansion that King Wilhelm I wanted, and whose exact resolution Bismarck achieved by simply governing without a budget, on the specific legal theory that the Constitution's silence on the procedure for resolving a deadlock between King and Parliament meant that the executive could continue functioning without parliamentary approval. His first speech to the Parliamentary Budget Committee contained the specific phrase that became the founding statement of the particular political philosophy he would spend the next 28 years applying. The great questions of the day would not be settled by speeches and majority decisions, but by blood and iron. The liberal delegates were appalled. Bismarck had told them the exact truth about how power works, and they found the particular truth more offensive than reassuring. The specific political intelligence of Bismarck's approach to German unification was the particular understanding that the specific outcome he wanted Prussian hegemony in a German national state could not be achieved by the direct announcement of the intention to achieve it, because the direct announcement would produce the exact coalition of Austrian, French, and Russian opposition, whose combined weight exceeded Prussian military capacity. The specific approach that Bismarck developed instead was the particular method of creating the conditions for the desired outcome through a sequence of carefully staged crises whose individual appearance of responding to specific provocations, rather than pursuing a predetermined agenda, concealed the exact strategic vision that connected them. He was not improvising, but he presented himself as improvising, which was the specific political disguise that made each move appear defensive rather than aggressive until the particular moment when the cumulative effect was irreversible. The Danish War of 1864 was the specific first step, whose particular genius was the creation of a situation that appeared to serve Austrian as well as Prussian interests, the joint campaign over the Schleswig-Holstein duchies, whose exact legal status was sufficiently complicated that Bismarck described it as understood by only 3 people, of whom one was dead, one had gone mad, and one, himself, had forgotten the details. The particular war that Prussia and Austria fought together to extract the duchies from Danish control produced the specific joint administration of the conquered territories whose inherent instability Bismarck immediately began exploiting, creating the exact friction between Prussian and Austrian interests over the administration of Schleswig and Holstein, respectively, that the particular Austro-Prussian War of 1866 would resolve in Prussia's favor. He had used Austria's specific military force to accomplish the first step, and then converted the particular partnership into the specific rivalry that the second step required. Königgrätz on July Dry, 1866, was the specific military engagement that ended in a single day. The particular question of whether Prussia or Austria would dominate the German states, the exact battle where the Prussian needle gun, which could be loaded and fired lying down at the specific rate of approximately 5 rounds per minute, met the Austrian muzzle-loading rifles that required their soldiers to stand to reload, and where the particular tactical consequence of this technological difference was the exact 44,000 Austrian casualties against approximately 9,000 Prussian ones in a morning's fighting. Bismarck's particular genius in the peace that followed was the specific restraint with which he treated the defeated Austrian Empire. No territorial annexation from Austria proper, no particular humiliation, the exact peace of a statesman who understood that he needed Austria's specific acquiescence in the new German order, rather than the particular resentment that a crushing peace would produce. He was generous to Austria because he needed Austria's neutrality in the next war. The Ems dispatch manipulation of July 1870 was the specific act of political provocation whose particular audacity makes it the founding case study in the deliberate manufacture of casus belli. The French Emperor Napoleon III was already suspicious of Prussian power after Königgrätz and was looking for the particular diplomatic victory over Prussia that would restore French prestige. The specific candidacy of a Hohenzollern prince for the vacant Spanish throne gave Napoleon III the exact opportunity he was seeking, the particular demand that Prussia guarantee there would never be a Hohenzollern king of Spain. Wilhelm I, negotiating at the spa town of Ems, had achieved the specific diplomatic outcome of the Hohenzollern candidate's withdrawal, and had sent a telegram to Bismarck, describing the particular friendly tone of the French ambassador's reception of this news. Bismarck edited the telegram not by adding specific lies, but by removing the exact diplomatic courtesies whose particular presence made the encounter sound friendly, leaving the specific factual content in the form that made it sound like a mutual snub, and released it to the press. France declared war within days. The Franco-Prussian War lasted approximately 7 months. Paris was besieged. Napoleon III was captured at Sedan in the specific military humiliation of an emperor taken prisoner in the field. The particular ceremony that followed the specific proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at